All right, let's get to it. All right, guys. Hey, I want to thank you so much for jumping into the podcast. I don't know if you know about my podcast, if anybody told you about it, but we have to start off every podcast with the over the top intro because we are so grateful just to have you guys with us. Give us a little bit of your time. Is that okay if I talk good about you a
Absolutely.
little bit before we get in this project?
Oh yeah, do
Yes,
it.
go ahead.
Well, let's get to it. My first guest is known for her work at Crash Site Novelism and Wolf Joe. This person is from Manitoba, Canada. Put that down because we're going to talk about this a little bit more. She is a writer who specializes in stories about films and indigenous women and girls in non-traditional genres, superheroes, fantasy, and sci-fi, and not to be outdone. Your director extraordinaire, who will be joining us, my next guest, is also from the great white north of Montreal, Quebec, Canada. He's known for his work on the Kitchen Coldwater Cowboys, Keeping Canada Alive, and his latest project, their latest project, I should say, the Death Tour, which is gaining major support in the festival circuit. This writer, director, photographer, who also speaks 4 languages, English, Portuguese, French, and awesomeness. And you're about to find out why. Yes, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having us, Sam.
Thank
What
you.
an intro.
Sonya, Stephan, this is great. Mainly because I watched this documentary, and I don't know if you noticed or not, I'm a bit of a wrestling fan.
Yes.
Okay.
Just a tad bit, just a tad bit. So it spoke to me on different levels. I've always heard about this death tour. I've always heard it in lore, whether it be podcasts or would it be offhandedly mention it during wrestling itself. But what was it about this, I guess, lore, the story of it that made this project come about?
So I was not a wrestling fan. Knew nothing about wrestling growing up. Probably even poo-pooed it a bit. But I happened to be by fluke in one of these small communities on a project when I was getting ready to go for bed one night in the back of my truck. This pretty far north. There was no hotels in this town, and these kids just swarmed the gym, and I discovered that wrestling's coming to town. So it had taken us 3, 4 days to get there, crossing over ice roads and, packing our own food and beds. So I was not expecting this to happen. And lo and behold, 300 kids packed the small gym, throwing pop cans and coins at these grown men and women in spandex, doing backflips off the top rope and then hugging the kids. And it was these two worlds that were like two vastly different and fairly unknown worlds to me that just clearly came together over their passion for wrestling. So, that kind of got the wheels spinning, and then pretty quickly, enter Sonya, who is well, I'll let her take it from there.
Okay.
Well, I knew of the Death Tour before when because I'm a huge wrestling fan. I've always been. I met Adam Copeland when I was a little girl when he was on a Death Tour. I was scared of him because I'd never seen eyes that blue before, and so I was terrified. I thought he was a monster. But yeah, like it was something I was really interested in doing because I hadn't known it was still going on when stuff approached me. Like it was popular when I was a kid. It didn't stop in my home community, but it was something that I knew happened because like it was the only thing that would go up there. It was the only it was the only entertainment that would come up there that wasn't put on by the communities. And so it was really cool to me when stuff approached me. I was just like, I kind of am interested in going up there, but I was really hoping he knew how difficult it was going to be because I was like, okay, it's going to be hard, it's going to be long, it's going to be annoying, but like I hope you're ready for what's going to happen because we're basically not going to have a good night's sleep for like 2 weeks.
And that's honest, mainly because, like I said, I've heard about this, and much like you, um, for starters, I didn't think that still existed. I thought that was just like an old wives' tale because you hear about these territory stories, you hear about all these horror stories. And one of the things I think me and you, Sonya, we have already in us, and Stephen, we don't bring you on Like I kind of said this in the intro, like how you have fascination with sci-fi and fantasy and heroes, and professional wrestling is pretty much the closest we're going to get to real life superheroes in some way, shape, or form. So when it does come through your town, you're going to be there because you're going to see these people doing these larger than life aspects. And watching this documentary, when they roll through the town, and granted, they are just going through it. Every stop they made or before they got there, there was always a problem. It was never, like you said, it's not a good night's sleep. It's 2 weeks, but it felt like 3 years.
Yeah.
When you see those, the love that those communities shown to that, why was it so important to just highlight how they just rallied around these gyms or these community centers wherever they showed up?
I think it was important just because like a lot of people wondered why Tony still does it. Like a lot of people wonder why people are like wrestlers right now are clamoring to be on the next tour because the audiences are so like you don't get an audience like the way the kids reacted in the film anymore in wrestling unless it's like Chicago for an AEW event basically. But even then like the kids in Cross Lake and God's Lake Narrows and God's River could give Chicago a run for its money in terms of how crazy the kids get. And so I think it was important. Like I knew that when we did this documentary that I didn't want us to just to focus on the wrestling itself because like any run-of-the-mill documentary would focus just on the cool stories and the wrestling and all that. And I'm like, I want to know why these like veterans and newbie wrestlers wanted to do this tour that is difficult. Like it's in the name, the death tour. Like why do they want to do it? And largely they do it because you never get an audience like that anymore. An audience who truly believes that you're a hero or a villain. And so it was just overwhelming to be a part of that. Because when we were filming it, like we were in the midst of it, and there was one time where I think it was like no, it was Steph who was like holding his camera next to Sage, and like the kids were trying to get him out of the way so they could get to her, and like it was just really cool. Like a it's not a wrestling thing you encounter anymore. That seems to be the thing of like the 70s and the 80s where people like there's no off screen for wrestlers like there was like there isn't for the ones that go up there if that makes sense. And so it was just cool to highlight the communities just to show like their love for it because even though we don't show it, a lot of adults we encountered up there said that they themselves as kids went to the events. And yeah, it's just like so fascinating to hear their stories.
And I'm glad you kind of touched on that because even though Tony Condello, who is a living legend, and everything you needed to know about Tony was shown in this documentary. I'm sure there's more to this. Tony he's done it all, he's seen it all, and it's just he's hard nosed, hard boiled, old school to his heart. There's never change. That's what I guess what I'm getting at. But it was so good to see the wrestlers because each one had their own rich, and I'm picking my words very carefully, not to spoil this, but each one of them had their own rich personal story. How did you guys treat their origins? How did you guys decide, okay, we need to highlight this part of this wrestler or this part of that wrestler?
Hmm.
Well, I mean, we'd spoken to as soon as Tony knew who was coming to the tour, we were talking to him. So, months out of the tour, we knew Sean was going for sure, massive damage. He was for sure going. Tony was for sure going. So we knew, we were following them. And then pretty quickly we picked up the rest of the cast. And so, as soon as Tony was booking people, we were speaking to them. And, honestly, each of them had an incredible story. That was probably one of the hardest part of the film was having to only focus on two, or four and plus Tony. And so, they each have very rich stories. And so what we'd also were kind of looking at is what's going to challenge them on this trip, whether it's whether it's having faith, having faith in themselves or their abilities, or the language barrier, or kind of figuring out, are they still, like for Sean, is this something he wants to keep doing? So we were looking at like whose story is inspiring, who has kind of come a long way, and who stands to gain something from this trip. So that was our approach to figuring out who to kind of hone in on. For the 2 weeks of the trip, because it's not long to make a film. 2 weeks, like um, it's a lot of time, but it's also not a lot of time. Like a lot can happen or nothing can happen, and then so we had to. But in our case, the trip was pretty rich, so we were we kept busy.
Okay, okay. One thing about that, and I want to talk about this. He is a producer of it. Chris Jericho and Kenny Omega make cameos in this project, and both are, if memory serves me right, they're both from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and they have both been on the Death Tour. They both share their very similar, very different but kind of similar experiences of said Death Tour. And why was it so important to highlight those who even, that have, quote, made it to talk about said Death Tour in there, even though there's a bit of an age gap between those two? Why was it so important to have those compared to the wrestlers that you've shown in this doc?
I think it was just like well, sorry, Steph. It was just to show like the prestige of it and probably the longevity of the tour. Like not to say like those wrestlers are old or anything. It was just like because Kenny Omega is like absolutely like one of the best wrestlers ever, same with Jericho.
Mhm.
And it was just like having, and because of the Manitoba connection, that was something we also wanted to incorporate just because Jericho like is so beloved in Winnipeg, Kenny Omega the same. And it was just something we knew we would have to include, well, not have to include, but would feel honored to include just because we wanted to show that like the tour has legs and it has led to really substantial careers for some people, and like it is a badge of honor for some Canadian wrestlers to have been on it because it just shows your mettle and your love for the business in terms of like what you're willing to go through for, so like if you basically if you can survive the tour, you can survive anything that is thrown your way in the business. And I think that is completely true. I thought it was just like hyperbole before, but it's like no, every horrible thing you will face in wrestling as a whole is stuff you will have to endure on this tour. So it's like I think that was also important to get their word in on it as well because they had been on it.
Mhm. This this doc really not only just, it's not just all about wrestling. It takes a deep dive in the indigenous culture and the communities in northern Canada. Which in a lot of this doc has something to do with whether it be just the way they live today, or some of the struggles that faces there, or some of the, for lack of a better term, whitewashing of said culture. I'm taking steps because I don't want to give a specific example to give away the movie. But how was that to approach those cultural things where things can be a bit sensitive? Can we say that? Is that fair without ruining
Oh
anything?
yeah.
Okay.
Well,
How did you
'cause
approach that without stepping over the line?
I was really thankful for Steph because I'm Indigenous, I'm Cree, I'm from up there. I was really touched by how for lack of a better word, I didn't have to hold Steph back from making a mistake. Not like he like, but a lot of working as an Indigenous creative often involves like having to tell people about how things are done in Indigenous communities. And I was just really touched by how much care went into it. And I think also Sage was really big helpful in that context too, because she was just she because so many people were so beloved with her when we got to the communities, people were more willing to I don't want to say open up to us, but like we walked the walk basically by having Indigenous people in major roles in the wrestling tour itself that people were like, okay, like they have an Indigenous director, they have three Indigenous wrestlers, they have four women in their tour group, like like they seem to be doing right. And I think like that earnestness we brought to the project that me and Steph both had because like we're both pretty new. I think that was something that really connected with people that like they knew we weren't trying to take advantage, that we weren't trying to be carnies. We weren't trying to get something up or on them. And I think that was something that people connected to.
Okay, okay. Um, and one of the stories that we talked about, I don't want to rush past this because it is a big deal. The suicide epidemic that's happened, not only exclusive to those cultures, but in Canada, Northern Canada as a whole. And you guys handled that with like you show the effects that it has on the community, that smaller communities, I should say, and you show the effects of how it does a community as a whole. Now, I know we're talking about some very sensitive ground here. So, how was that? Because a lot of times, communities, big or small, things like that, they just don't want to talk about. So, how was it to, quote, convince them to open up about that?
I mean, it kind of happened. It was certainly not like we didn't intend on kind of telling that part of the story. It's the film and the journey definitely took a turn. And so, when though there is a suicide, there's often there are suicide epidemics that happen in these communities and in the whole area. And so when we got there, it happened. And when there's a death in these towns, the towns close for 5, 6 days. And so how that impacts the tour is that the tour then has to reshift its schedule. And so it's really felt within the tour. And we were very careful. Like we did not want to, when it happened near us or close to us, the last thing we just kind of all retreated within, where we were staying, whether it's the school or the or the community center. So we did not want to go out and like start interviewing, the community about what happened. But, we had gotten to work, we also worked with community members in each town we stopped at. We hired PAs in each town we worked with, and they were kind of our community liaisons. And in some towns, we got to know them better than others because we stayed longer, and they were able to kind of give us some insight on what was going on, but also, some of the wrestlers themselves, like Sage and Dez, who are from other indigenous communities across Canada. They were able to kind of share with us their experience. So, we kept it insulated to like to the tour and the people who were on the tour as much as possible because, it's the story we were telling. We were telling the story of the people who were like on this tour and who are experiencing it. And they were able to, and unfortunately, it's a reality in many of these indigenous communities across the whole country. So they were all able to kind of speak to it and yeah.
Okay, okay. Guys, I got two more questions actually, because I know we're getting up against it. It was a lot of stuff in this documentary. I don't know if you guys had a dare of how much we could put in 90 minutes, but um, I'm almost certain, but I just need to ask, what, if anything, was left on the cutting room floor that you guys didn't put in that you would have liked to?
You know what? I got one. I mean, what was left on the cutting room floor is two more sequels for sure. There's a whole other sequel, but one really great series of scenes we shot that didn't end up making the film, but was that Dez and the gang on a couple of days off made a horror film in one of the school gyms or in the community we were waiting on. We were there for a weekend. We were not there. We were there for a few days. We had some downtime, and they made a little like campy horror film, and you can find it online. It's called, I forget what, but you got to look up Des Loreen online. And so we followed the filming of this horror film, which they did over the course of the 2 week journey. We were in a town one night, they were filming the scenes, and we had some hysterical moments where they, were like, stealing our sound guy and using his gear for stuff and our cameras. And so there were, they kind of broke the fourth wall there. That was really fun. So we had a lot of fun doing that. So there was, but yeah, there was so many moments, so many scenes with all of our characters. Wavell Star, who is an absolute legend of a wrestler, too. We'd filmed many things with him too that, you know, ultimately didn't make the scene because the order of what we showed, it just didn't quite work out. So there's What Do We Leave? A sequel for sure. We could probably make a sequel with what was left. Yeah.
The parts that I wanted to keep in were when we were well, I don't want to say trapped. When we were in God's River for like 3 or 4 days, like because we couldn't go anywhere else, people kept bringing us food. And the big deal is like food is very expensive up there. And they were bringing us like pizza, they were bringing us moose meat, they were bringing us like cakes and stuff, like mostly for the wrestlers, not for the crew or anything. But like we were sharing it, and it was just really cool that despite how much things cost up there, they were still willing to share with us because of like what the wrestlers brought to the community and like the joy they brought. And so I wish we could have kept that in, but yeah, like there was so much good stuff in there that like uh we if we could have gone for 3 hours, we would have.
Hey, it was a lot in there. So I know we're getting to that point. We're wrapping it up, but I want to thank you guys again for jumping on this podcast. Give me a little bit of your time talking about the movie, The Death Tour. Um, I know you're doing a festival circus right now, but when will we see it? Where can you Joe Schmoes and like me just see it?
In Canada, it's going to air on. There'll be a version of it airing on CBC. It'll be like a cut down version on CBC, so not the 90 minutes, but a 50-minute on CBC. APTN, another Canadian network, will have the full 90-minute version, and then the US will be the Fight Network. Will have it too. Deathtour.com
There we
is
go.
yeah, there we
All
go.
right.
Is where you'll find all future information.
Okay. So I want to thank you guys so much. We're up against it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for everything. You just I wish you much success in the future. I know we ran a little bit long, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
All
Thank you,
right.
Sam.
All right. Have a good one.
Best. Appreciate you, friend.
All right. Thanks.